I don't think that the government is misleading us at all. I think that the number that comes out of BLS and the Department of Labor is very, very accurate. I need to make that very, very clear so I don't suddenly disappear. I need to make it home tonight.
The CEO of Gallup backpedaling on his claim that the unemployment rate touted by the White House is a, quote, big lie, end quote. Jim Clifton heard there, and is reflected in this Newsmax.com headline. Jim Clifton said he's worried he might suddenly disappear if he disputed the rate. Wow. Against that backdrop, let's continue our conversation. Our co-host this hour, former Congressman Pete Hoekstra, and also joining us now via Skype, John Zogby of Zogby Analytics, the author of the book First Globals: Understanding, Managing, and Unleashing Our Millennial Generation. John, thanks for Skyping in, and you have offered a written response to the Gallup CEO's backtrack, saying it's ridiculous for Mr. Clifton to suggest he could become a target of the Obama administration. In fact, you go on to say, quote, "I am happy that the GOP has finally discovered the concept of the real unemployment rate, although it took outright contempt for anything involving Barack Obama to get to this point," close quote. Now, John, I got to tell you, a lot of us have been pointing labor participation rate and numbers being specious for quite some time. So it's not been recently discovered. Why would you say that?
That was a little strong. So let me begin that way. I took umbrage mainly with Mr. Clifton suggesting that the Bureau of Labor Statistics might have a hit team. Now, I suppose he was kidding, but the interpretation of what he said was taken pretty seriously. And yeah, absolutely, the BLS figures are inadequate, and I make that point in my op-ed piece. On the other hand, it's a very partisan thing. You know, Democrats go after the Bush administration for lying and fudging the unemployment figures. Republicans go after a Democratic administration. I mean, the bottom line is it would be great if everybody just simply agreed that there is a significant amount of unemployment and underemployment in this country, and we play with the statistics we have.
John, how many, in your polling, surveying of the American people, how many Americans would believe that someone like Clifton could be targeted not by a hit team, but by the IRS, by the Department of Labor, or some other government agency for taking on the Obama administration?
Well, only an interpretation here, but 42% still believe that 9/11 was an inside job of some sort, a variety of conspiracy theories, but still 42%. That's much more a statement about the American people and the lack of trust that they have for their government. And so let me put a figure at somewhere about 40 or 42% then.
So will we label that 40 to 42% the constantly cynical? Is that a good label for them?
Constantly cynical, and when you get into something like 9/11 and an inside hit job, those are not people who are going to be turned around or convinced in any way.
With 4 minutes remaining, John and Pete, I just want to talk about a public figure rather than a political one, and that is Brian Williams, in terms of his misremembering what happened to him in Iraq, and really with a handful of stories. Now let's take a listen to the NBC Nightly News anchor struggling to explain his Iraqi helicopter story with newly released audio.
It was my first engagement of the war, and remember, we were all, I think, scared. It all became a fog of getting down on the ground. What do we do now? Taking our direction from the air crews.
So, John, perhaps this is not so much a question about public opinion, but public perception. What will it take for Brian Williams to return to a favorable, if not exalted, position in the minds of American TV viewers?
JD, I don't think he can, frankly. Let's hypothetically say, if the blogs would shut down, if this weren't a constant topic in social media, and then the blogs that pick up that social media, perhaps if it dies down. But there are news stories, and there's an internal investigation. There's the politics within NBC, whose ratings have suffered in the last 3 or 4 days since this all went public. There are, again, some news stories involving Israel, involving Katrina, and perhaps even more. When your stock and trade is trust and remembering and being an anchor figure in every sense of that word, my gut sense tells me it's going to be very, very difficult for him to recover from this.
John, the apology, was it watching it, I thought it was as bad, if not worse, than the original misstatement.
I agree with that. He raised a whole lot more questions, especially since this is a media person. There's a public record here. With a media person who has purposely gone out and done interviews and expanded his resume to become an entertainment figure. There's a huge amount of video, and what he did at best was cloud the picture even more. Pete, I totally agree with you. He did not do himself any service.
John,
I don't know that he can anymore.
John, we're going to circle back to Gallup, not with the personnel, but with some poll numbers. According to Gallup, President Obama is the most polarizing president we've seen. Here are the numbers now. Mr. Obama checks in at 84% of Republicans upset with him, as opposed to Ronald Reagan, or actually George W. Bush at 84%. Let me revise and extend the remarks. I guess there is a tie, judging on what I'm seeing here, but I guess if you combine it with the other folks, I'll have to do the math. Mathematics aside, in the 30 seconds that remain, very quickly, the polarization, can anything be done to change it?
I suppose that, it can. There are still many independents and many people who are more judicious, but this is the state of America today. And the bottom line is we are, at the moment, I won't say hopelessly paralyzed, but terribly paralyzed.
Well, we are polarized, and perhaps that leads to some public policy paralysis. We're moving along, thanks to you, gents. Now, a Newsmax news update.